Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be filming my March reading wrap-up. So March was an extremely up and down reading month for me, but I did find a few new favorites that I'm excited to talk to y'all about. However, I'm going to start this video by talking about books that I DNF'd because in my February reading wrap-up, which was the first one I ever filmed, I did ask if y'all wanted to hear about DNFs in the future, and most people said yes. So let's get started. Okay, I had 3 DNFs this month, and the first one was 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. I am so disappointed that I had to DNF this for several different reasons. One of them being that the cover is gorgeous. I mean, do you see this? This is one of the best covers I've ever seen. This was also on my March TBR. I pulled it in my March TBR jar video, which I'll link up in the cards if you want to see that. But I was just really looking forward to this. It's a YA fantasy, and I have been loving YA fantasy over the last couple months. But unfortunately, this just did not work for me. I read over half of it. I probably read about 60% before I DNF'd. And the main reason I DNF'd was because of the inconsistent writing. So there's a lot of background to this book, but basically what you need to know is that our main girl, Shiori, she and her 6 brothers get cursed and sort of banished from their kingdom. So the brothers are turned into cranes during the day, but at night they turn back into humans. That's their curse, and they also can't return to the land they came from. Shiori's curse is a bit more complex because she has to wear this bowl on her head, and it's a really large bowl that covers down to her nose, okay? And she also is not allowed to talk. If she talks, for every word she speaks or every sound she makes, one of her brothers will die. And it's very heavily emphasized that she can't make any sounds at all. So I thought that was a pretty interesting premise, and I was enjoying reading about that as the book went on. But then the whole bowl on the head and no noise thing kind of went out the window because it was just inconsistent. So for example, it mentioned Shiori chuckling at one point, and I'm thinking she's not allowed to make any sounds because at one point she, I think, pricked her finger on something and she kind of gasped, and she was warned that if she did that again, made any noise, her brothers would die. So a chuckle is definitely a sound, right? So I was confused about why that didn't have repercussions. And then with the bowl on her head, she can see through it, but it's never said that other people can see through it to her eyes. But throughout the book, she's constantly meeting people's gazes or glaring at people, and they react to her look and stuff like that. And I'm just confused about how the bowl works. Is the bowl transparent? What's the point of the bowl if it's transparent? Is it transparent sometimes? So the inconsistent writing did not work for me. I also didn't like that there were so many main characters because you have Shiori and then her 6 brothers, who are the cranes, of course. And the brothers were not well fleshed out. I had a super hard time keeping them separate from one another. They didn't really have any defining characteristics. And to top it off, the pacing of this book was so fast. I have never read such a whirlwind of a book before, and the fast pacing really made it difficult for me to keep my interest because there was no stakes at all. Anytime something bad happened, it was resolved almost instantly. If not in the next paragraph, then definitely in the next chapter. They were already moving on to a new event.
So you have them getting banished, and then you have Shiori trying to find work. She worked at this place, then she leaves the place, then she gets caught in a waterfall, then she finds her brothers, and her brothers leave, then they have to go get this magic plant from this island, and they get chased by a dragon, but then the dragon doesn't attack them, and then she starts making the net, and then she gets kidnapped, but then she gets rescued, and
it was just going so fast that I was losing interest because nothing was really making me wonder what's going to happen next or how are they going to get out of this situation because it was resolved instantly. So yeah. I will say though, as far as I read, this book is clean. There's no spice, there's no actual language. They do use made up swear words based on stuff in their fantasy world. So if you don't like made up swearing, you might not like this, but it was clean as far as I read, and I did appreciate that. Moving on to my second DNF, that was What Katy Did by Susan Coolidge. This is a classic middle grade novel, and I wanted to read this for middle grade March, which was happening last month. It fits several of the prompts. It has flowers on the cover and some different stuff like that. But this book, how is this a classic? I do not understand how anyone ever enjoyed this, especially children. Have any of y'all read this? Because I had never heard of this until I joined the booktube community, so it's definitely not popular where I'm from. It's, I believe, set in the north, so maybe that's where the fame is coming from. But my main problem with this book is the writing style because it's seriously just info dumping central. It was just massive, massive info dumping. The author, Susan, right? Yeah, Susan here, she did not write a narrative story. She basically writes a laundry list of activities and descriptions, and it was just boring. I didn't want to read this laundry list of what they were doing all day. I wanted to hear a story. And to go along with that, just look at how the book is written. I mean, there's no dialogue at all. It's just page after page of these really big paragraphs for a middle grade novel, and just descriptions of what's happening and what they're eating, what they're wearing. I was bored. I did not like this at all. I got about 80 pages in before I DNF'd. I do feel like, though, even though I didn't finish the book, that I read enough to get a good idea of the dynamic between the kids, who are the main characters, because Katy is the biggest sister in a family of 6, I believe, and they're being cared for by their spinster aunt, Izzy. And I just did not care for the dynamic between those two groups. I felt like it was a really bad example for middle grade children, because Aunt Izzy is one of those people who should not be around children, okay? She does not understand children. She hates loud noises. She hates messes. She thinks kids should just sit in the house and read books or stitch on samplers all day, which is just not how kids work. So I didn't like that she was constantly getting on to them for doing normal stuff that kids like to do, like run around and play outside. But the kids also reacted to her poorly because they would purposefully disobey her, which is just not nice. And I just did not like that dynamic. I didn't think it was good for a middle grade book. So yeah, DNF. Before I put this book down, I just realized I didn't really tell y'all what it was about. It's kind of like an Anne of Green Gables story where you just follow Katy. She's always getting into little messes and having to get out of them. And you hear about her daily family life and her brothers and sisters as well. So very simple, standard kind of plot like that. Now we can move on. Okay, my third DNF, I don't have the physical copy with me, but I will put a picture up on the screen. That was The Echo of Old Books by Barbara Davis, and this book also came off my March TBR, so once again, I was very disappointed that I had to DNF it. I read about 100 pages of this book, so I think I was around a quarter of the way through, and so much stuff was rubbing me the wrong way. I had really high hopes for this book because it has like a 4.4 on Goodreads, super high rating on Goodreads. So I'm clearly in the minority here, but the main issue I had was that the plot just did not make sense. So we have our main girl, Ashlyn. She is a rare book dealer, and she finds these 2 books, which are really more like journals because they're handwritten and they obviously haven't been published by a publisher. But she decides she wants to find out where these books came from and who wrote them and stuff. And maybe it's just me, but if I find a book like that, a handwritten journal with no publishing information or any kind of identifying characteristics, my first instinct would be to read the book to see if I could find info about the person that wrote it, since it's like a journal, right? Ashlyn does not do this. She, for some reason, starts reading the books page by page or chapter by chapter, just little snippets at a time, and she'll take whatever info she gets out of that book. Like, for example, one of the books in the first chapter, it mentions a woman named Goldie. So she decides to look up people named Goldie from this city and time period, instead of just continuing reading to see if maybe Goldie's last name is in there or some other defining characteristic. She just starts trying to research these books. And I was just so confused about why she's reading these books piece by piece and trying to put the puzzle together that way instead of reading the whole book. I don't know, maybe it's just me. I just didn't really care for that plot point. And then the next thing I didn't like was that we have technically 3 POVs because you have Ashlyn's POV, and then as you're reading the 2 journals, which are written by separate people, you get their POVs as well. But all 3 POVs have the exact same voice, so I was kind of confused about who was talking, and it was hard to distinguish the characters. The reason that I officially DNF'd The Echo of Old Books, though, was because I could not stand one of our main characters, the journal that's written by this girl named Belle. She is a very wealthy heiress in the time period, which I believe is 1940. Yeah, it was 1940 because it was during World War II. So Belle is very wealthy, and her dad has decided that she's going to marry this guy that is really rich just to do family connections and stuff like that. There's no romance involved in the marriage. So Belle does not want to marry this guy, but she goes along with the marriage because she says if she doesn't, her dad will basically take away her allowance and he won't buy her the nice things that she has and wants anymore. So that's her excuse for why she's going through with this marriage with this guy she doesn't even like. And this guy is a piece of work, okay? He is a total mess. He's an absolute jerk. So I already have a problem with that because you should just have enough self-respect not to go through with something just because your dad won't buy you nice clothes and jewelry anymore. But then Belle, because she doesn't like the guy she's engaged to, she starts a relationship with the guy who wrote the other journal, okay? So she's cheating on her fiance, and I know she doesn't love him and everything, but she made a commitment to that guy, okay? And I did not like to see her cheating on him, so... The cheating trope, though, I see that quite often in books lately, and apparently it's not a big deal for a lot of people. It really bothers me, but I know Dear Henry, Love Edith by Becca Kinzer In that book, Henry is cheating on his girlfriend with Edith, for spoiler alert, I guess, for a portion of the book anyway. And a lot of people love that book. I really didn't like that book for several reasons, but the cheating trope was one of them. But apparently the cheating thing isn't a big deal for some people, so if that doesn't bother you, you might like the Echo of Old Books too. I could probably do a whole video on Dear Henry Love Edith, but not today. Okay, now getting into the books that I actually finished this month. The first one that I actually finished was Dear Mr. Knightley by Katharine Reay. I'll put that up on the screen as well. And I gave this book 2 stars. I pretty much never give a book 1 star because if it's a 1 star, I'll DNF it. But 2 stars is, obviously I didn't like it very much. So this book is an epistolary novel. It's written entirely in letters, which is what drew me to this novel because I love epistolary elements in books, and I thought the idea of a whole book written in letters was really fun. But unfortunately, it just came off as very unbelievable. So this book follows our main character, Sam, who is an orphan. She was orphaned around 14 or 15, I believe it said in the book, but she's 23 when the book starts, and she's still living at Grace's house, which is like an orphanage type thing. It's kind of like an orphanage / workplace for her because she also works there in addition to living there. But at the beginning of the book, she gets notified that someone wants to pay for her tuition to go to this college, and the only stipulation is that she has to write letters to this mystery person while she's there to tell them how she's doing in the college. So Sam agrees, and the mystery person refers to himself only as Mr. Knightley, so that's how you get the title of the book, and that's where the letters come in because she's writing to Mr. Knightley about, initially it's supposed to be about her experience at college, but it quickly becomes basically like a diary for her. So this is where the unrealistic portion comes in because the letters are pages and pages and pages long with whole conversations recounted. And that's just not how letters work, okay? And most people's memories don't work that way either, just saying. So I really think this book would have been better as a third-person narrative where it just mentions that she's writing to Mr. Knightley, because you could have kept some epistolary elements and you could have kept the title, but it would have been more realistic because I was so thrown off. I would be reading the book like it was a first-person narrative, and then she would sign off like "Sincerely Sam" to Dear Mr. Knightley. And it just really threw me off because it was so obvious this was not meant to be a letter. So that was weird. And then Sam also has an obsession with classic literature, and I love classic literature myself, but the literary references in this book were off the charts. I mean, they felt like they were happening on every page, sometimes multiple on a page. And Sam kind of uses literary references and quotes as a coping mechanism, which I understand. Everyone has different coping mechanisms, but it really came off like Sam had no original thoughts or feelings, and whenever anything happened, she just went to a dead classic author to pull a reference to respond to that situation. So for a large portion of the book, I was like, what is Sam's personality? Because she just quotes Jane Austen all the time, and I know how Jane Austen feels about the situation, but not Sam. Okay, and then the next thing I have to say is a mild spoiler, so if you want to read this book, maybe skip ahead a few seconds, but basically I did not like the romance in this book because, as is pretty obvious from the title, the guy that Sam is writing to ends up becoming her love interest, and he knows who she is from the beginning, okay? But she does not know him, and I just felt like it was really wrong for him to deceive her because they do meet in person while she's writing to Dear Mr. Knightley and thinking that she doesn't know who this guy is. I just felt like it was really wrong because she was pouring her heart out to him like she was writing in a diary, again, because the letters are not really letters. And he's getting all this private personal information that she says she would never tell anyone in real life, but she feels like she can tell him because he's a stranger. And he just hides the fact that he's Mr. Knightley from her for so long. And I didn't like that. That kind of gave me the creeps. I would not really be attracted to a guy who did that to me, personally. I don't know, how would y'all feel if you were writing to this stranger who said you never met, and then you did meet, and he didn't bother to tell you who he was, and you just kept writing all your personal feelings and experiences to him? I don't know, is it me? Like, this is why I did not want to talk about DNFs in my videos, because I feel like I'm so picky, and I just kind of go off on tangents when I'm reviewing books that I either DNF'd or didn't like. So I don't know, maybe I'm being too harsh. I hope I'm not though. As an author myself, I understand that everyone has opinions. My books have 1-star ratings, and I'm sure people have DNF'd my books and they have some not so great reviews and stuff. So that's just how it is, I guess. Reading is a very subjective thing. So that is Dear Mr. Knightley. I'm looking at my notes over here. The next book that I read was Final Word by Janet Sumner Johnson. I also read this for middle grade March. Technically, I listened to it as an audiobook, so I listened to it for middle grade March, and I gave this 2 stars as well. This one is kind of my fault, okay? Because I went into this book blind. I did not know that this book is inspired by The Westing Game, that book from the 70s. Which we had to read that book in school, and I did not like that book when I was a kid. I thought it was so boring and just did not like it, but apparently it's super popular, and this book, Final Word, is not the only kind of redone version of it, so I guess I'm in the minority again. In case you're not familiar, The Westing Game is a very traditional inheritance type mystery story, or it's more like a mystery puzzle, because the inheritance can be won by someone. It's not given to someone specific, and Final Word is the same way. There's a large sum of money up for grabs to someone who wins a spelling bee. Yes, Final Word is themed around a spelling bee. The town that it's set in, which is a little town, I think it's a fictional town in Oregon, was founded or kind of sponsored by this family whose claim to fame is that they make personalized dictionaries where you can add up to 10 photos next to certain words. So you can put like a picture of your baby next to the word cute or something like that. Which sounds like a kind of interesting idea, but I have a hard time thinking it would really take off, but that's a different story. As an entrepreneur myself, I was just interested in the personalized dictionary thing. But the family also sponsors this annual spelling bee, okay? And for this year's spelling bee, the prize is $500,000, which is pretty impressive, and the whole town is into it, basically, but there's only 10 slots for people who can get into the spelling bee, and you have to go as a family. So the main family that we follow is the Smiths, and they get into the spelling bee, and it's the mother who is Betty, and then she has a son and a daughter, Hope and Gordon. They get into the spelling bee along with 9 other families, and they're all in the running for this $500,000 prize. And there's also this missing manuscript mystery that kind of is a side plot, but I just could not get past the spelling bee thing because everyone in the family participates in the spelling bee. So you have, for example, Betty, who is a grown woman, competing against her children who are 12. And I just found that odd because, you know, what adult is going to willingly enter a spelling bee with children? The youngest kid in the book is 10, I think. So you have these 40, 45-year-old men and women doing a spelling bee against kids. Not only does that seem unfair, but it just seems like a normal adult would not do this. Okay, it's kind of like you're not gonna have a basketball game where one team is all 6'5" grown men and the other team is, you know, 7th graders, because it's a little bit unfair there. So the whole time I'm reading this book and they're going to the spelling bee, I'm having a hard time picturing these adults battling these children. And also, I don't think there's that many kids out there who are 10 and 12 and know words like tachycardia and can spell it. So the lack of realism on that part bothered me. And then because you have these 10 families participating in the spelling bee, there's just so many characters, it was really hard to follow, and I didn't like that. But the main reason I gave this book 2 stars was because at the end of the book, there's this super unnecessary scene of like forced captivity / torture / child endangerment that just did not need to be in the book, okay? Especially listening on audio with the kids' voices and stuff, I found it kind of disturbing, and it didn't really have an effect on the plot, and the children that were involved were not traumatized at the end of the book, which I was happy they weren't really upset or anything, but it just goes to show you that that scene had no effect on the plot, so it really needed to be left out. This was my first book by Janet Sumner Johnson, and her writing wasn't bad, so I might try her books again in the future, but I personally would not recommend Final Word. Unless you like The Westing Game, then you might enjoy this. The 6th book I want to talk about is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. This was another TBR pick for me, and I gave it 3 stars. I normally love classics, but this one was kind of a miss for me, but also kind of a hit because I really liked the main themes of the book. There's a couple different themes. I would say the biggest one is that unrepented sin really destroys you from the inside out. There's also a theme of judgment, basically not judging the whole world when you're a mess yourself, very similar to Jesus in the Bible when he talks about don't worry about the speck in your brother's eye when you've got a beam in your own eye. And then the 3rd theme, I would say, deals with outward appearances of religion versus true repentance and conviction in your heart. So all that was really interesting, especially in the backdrop of Puritan New England. I'm not super familiar with the Puritans, so just hearing about them and their customs was fun for me. But I found this book so clunky and dense, and I really was struggling to keep my attention as I read it. I don't normally advocate for abridged versions of classics, but this one I think could be heavily abridged and actually benefit from the process. So I think someday I might go get an abridged version and try to read it again, because this is such a popular book, and again, I really liked the themes. So I think if it had been a little less wordy, I would have liked it more. Book number 7 is The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Graeme. I also gave this 3 stars. This is another middle grade classic, and wow, this book was a wild ride. So I was super excited to read this when I pulled it for my March TBR. I was really looking forward to it because I know that C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien liked this book. They've both written about it in different articles and talked about it in interviews and stuff, so I knew it from them. It's also a classic, and I love reading classics, so I really thought I was going to like this. Just looking at the cover, it's giving Winnie the Pooh vibes, personally. I thought it was going to be a cute little wholesome story about animals and their little adventures and stuff, but no. This book follows our 4 main animal friends. You've got Mole, Toad, Badger, and the water rat here on the side. And you are basically just hearing about their little adventures, which was really fun at first, except then the book kind of got on this tangent with Toad and his addiction to automobiles. I don't know how else to describe it. I buddy read this, by the way, with Whitney from Whitney's Reading Journey, and we kind of had similar thoughts about this whole book. But the majority of the book ends up being about Toad and his literal addiction to cars. I mean, he just goes crazy when he sees them, and if he can't get around a car, he'll pretend he's driving a car and stuff. It's really weird. And also his addiction causes him a lot of problems, as you can imagine. That's what most of the story is about, and it just felt very repetitive, and I didn't see the point in hearing about it all the time. The focus on Toad was also disappointing because Badger was actually one of my favorite characters, and he's only in this book for maybe 2 chapters. I personally would have liked to hear more about Badger and less about Toad and the cars. Also, this is a middle grade book, technically. It was published the first time in 1907, I think. 1908. So it was published a long time ago. And I know things have changed since 1908, but I don't think this is a book that middle graders should be reading nowadays. There's a lot of references to drinking, first of all, and there's also some language. They use the less polite word for donkey several times in this book. Several times, probably like 2 dozen or 3 dozen times. They also use words like hussy and trollop, which I don't think kids need to be reading about, and I just didn't think that word needed to be used at all. The situation it was used in was just not good. So I don't think I'd recommend this for a middle grade book. Reading it as a classic as an adult was kind of fun in a weird way. This book was weird. I don't know what else to say. I do want to say though that the audiobook for this is so good. Whitney put me on to the audiobook, and it was just really fun. The guy that narrates it had a great voice, and he does sound effects, and there's music to it. It's very atmospheric and fun, but the book itself is a solid 3-star for me. Okay, now we're getting into my 4-star reads, and the first one I want to talk about is Dragonfruit by Makiia Lucier. We must first admire the cover. It's absolutely gorgeous, and it's definitely what drew me to this book. I actually got this book from my library originally, but I liked it so much that I had to go get my own copy. This is a young adult fantasy, and it's set in this world called Tamarind, where they have dragons and pirates and fun stuff like that. And in this world, sea dragon eggs, which are called dragonfruit, have healing properties, so they're very highly sought after. And in particular, this one kingdom wants a dragon egg because their princess is sick. So one day, someone brings 3 dragon eggs to the palace in order to give them to the princess, but before they can get there, 2 of the eggs are destroyed, leaving only 1 egg, and then a guy steals the last egg because his own daughter is sick. And that daughter is our main character, Hanalei. So her dad gives her the dragon egg and she is healed, but because of what her dad has done, stealing the egg from the princess essentially, they are now banished. So they have to go live out on their own, and then unfortunately Hanalei's father dies and leaves her an orphan. I think she was 9 or 10 when that happened. She has to make her own way in the world, but when the book actually starts, she's 18 or 19, and she's doing much better now. She's actually working for a university researching dragons, which is really cool, and she really enjoys it. But long story short, she gets caught up in this dragon egg hunt because the princess, the original princess, has still not been healed, and they're still looking for dragonfruit. So as you can imagine, this is a very adventurous novel. I super enjoyed it. I've never read a pirate fantasy or a dragon fantasy that I can recall. I know those are both very popular right now, but I'm not a huge fantasy reader. So for me, this was something very new, and I also really like this book because there's no spice at all. I think there's 1 kiss very briefly mentioned. There's 1 mild use of a swear word, and I think there might have been some made-up swearing in here. I honestly can't remember now. But overall, it's a very clean book. There is some violence and gore, mostly related to dragons attacking humans or humans attacking dragons. So if you don't like that, you might not enjoy this book, but I think fantasy tends to have a lot more violence than other books. Again, I'm not a huge fantasy reader yet, so maybe this is really light on gore for fantasy. I don't know. I don't have a lot of background knowledge, honestly. But if you read a lot of fantasy, I don't think this book would be too much for you. Oh, and also, if you like the childhood friends to more trope, you're gonna like the romance in here. The next book I read as an ebook, so I'll put the cover up on the screen, and that was A Place to Hang the Moon by Kate Albus. This is a middle grade historical fiction novel. This was super good. I gave it 4 stars, which is really saying something because I normally avoid World War II fiction like the plague. I do not like to read about World War II. It's just very disturbing to me and I just avoid it. But this book, being middle grade and not being directly involved on any of the fronts or anything, was much better for me. There's still some stuff in here, so check content warnings if you are sensitive to that. But overall, it was much easier for me to read. It also had a very whimsical narrative style, which I think helped overall. But the plot of this book is that you have our 3 kids who are William, Edmund, and Anna, and they've actually been orphaned. They have a large inheritance, but they can't come into it until they're older. So right now they're trying to get adopted. But unfortunately, they live in London, and London is being evacuated, so they can't really go through the normal adoption process with an agency. So the plan is that they'll be evacuated to the countryside, and hopefully while they're there, they'll find a family basically that wants to adopt 3 kids. So the book follows them kind of moving from house to house, trying to find their place in the world. You got that found family trope, which you know I love. It was just such a sweet, fun book. Even when the kids are struggling to find a family, I love the sibling moments and the banter. It was very cute and very realistic. I'm sure that the author who wrote this has siblings herself because you could just tell she has experience with growing up with siblings. This is also a bookish book. All 3 kids love to read and they spend a large portion of their time in this book at the library. So I enjoyed all those fun literary references. And really the only reason I didn't give this book 5 stars was because I wanted a little bit more resolution at the end because there were several characters who really mistreated the kids throughout the series, or throughout the book, not the series. And they never apologize or say anything. So I really would have liked to have those people learn their lesson or at least say sorry. I felt like they could have said sorry. That was really my only problem though. Overall, I highly recommend this book if you like middle grade historical fiction. Okay, book number 10 is The Mystery of the Old Clock by Carolyn Keene. This is the first Nancy Drew mystery, and this was my first time ever reading a Nancy Drew. Yeah, I don't know how I made it to 29 without ever reading a Nancy Drew book. I think I'm the only person on BookTube who hasn't read this, but I'm actually kind of glad I saved it to read as an adult because this was so fun. And maybe some of y'all know, but is this the original cozy mystery? Because it definitely gives cozy mystery vibes. It's not violent or graphic or anything like that. It's not scary, there's no thriller elements. It's just a fun little mystery that really keeps you guessing. I will say, maybe this is part of it being a younger middle grade type book, but every chapter here is a cliffhanger, which I didn't love, but maybe kids would like it. Again, I'm reading as an adult, so my tastes are a little bit different. This is another will/inheritance story, which was really fun. I did not expect that. I don't know why, maybe because I mostly read cozy murder mysteries, so picking this up I just assumed it was going to be murder, but I actually love finding cozies that don't involve a murder, so that was good. This book was originally written in 1930, I think, and then updated in the 50s, so it does read like an older book with older references and stuff like that, but I found that kind of charming. It was very easy to get lost in this book and the 1950s world. You can kind of tell by the style of her hair and dress. So I really enjoyed this. I'm looking forward to continuing the series. I actually bought the box set of the first 10 books, so I'm definitely going to read at least the first 10. I'm not sure how many there are in total, and I'm not sure if they kind of get boring after a while, but I'm excited to read the next few. Book number 11 was another audiobook. This was The Mystery of the Radcliffe Riddle by Taryn Souders, I believe. I'm not totally sure on how to pronounce her last name. I had never heard of her or this book before I found it randomly on Libby. And first off, I want to say that it was a great audiobook. If you're going to read this, I highly recommend at least partially listening to the audiobook. But the plot was really fun as well because you're following our little group of 3 people. The main guy on the front with the dark hair, that's Grady, and then the girl is Clemmy, and then the redhead in the back is Thad. And they all live in a small town in Georgia, so the book does have a southern setting, which I love, and the southern setting was done right. All these southern isms and southern speech was correct, which I enjoy because so many writers try to write southern stuff, and it just is like, bless their hearts. I know they're really trying, but they just don't know what they're doing. But this author, she must live in the South or something because she got it right, which made the book really fun to read, very atmospheric. So this little town in Georgia has a resident named Eudora, who is a very old woman who is known for carrying a shovel everywhere she goes and digging random holes in the ground looking for buried treasure. So obviously everyone thinks she's not all there anymore since she is so elderly, but then when she passes away, she leaves something to Grady, and Grady actually turns out to be her great-great-great nephew or cousin or something once removed, a very distant relation. So she leaves him something in her will, and he's very excited because she was quite wealthy and he and his father are struggling financially. But what she leaves him turns out to be a cross-stitch sampler. And at first he's really upset about this because she had a big house and stuff that she could have left him and he could have gotten money through that. But she leaves him this sampler, and with the help of his friends, he realizes that it's not just a sampler, it's actually a treasure map to that treasure that Eudora was always talking about and digging for. So the story is you following the kids as they figure out the treasure map and try to locate the treasure. I really liked this book. It was so cute. The friendships that they had were really wholesome, and the mystery was interesting. I found myself wondering what was going to happen next, and I thought that the way they solved it was good, because sometimes in these books, middle grade books, the kids are kind of handed clues, or they have to go about getting information in rather nefarious ways, and I don't think it's a great example for middle grade kids. But the way they solved it in this one was really good. This book also had some Christian themes, which I didn't expect. It wasn't labeled as a Christian book from my library at least, and the publisher I think was Source Books, which I'm not super familiar with. I have no idea if they normally publish Christian books. But in this book, they mentioned going to church and praying, and little things like Clemmy, the girl, she keeps a Bible on her nightstand, which I thought was really precious. I definitely enjoyed seeing that. I did take off a star though, because one of the kids uses architect names to swear with, which I just didn't really like. And also there is some name calling between the children, which I know is realistic, like kids call each other names and stuff, but I just didn't really like it. So yeah, 4 stars, but still a great book. I really recommend it, and I've already purchased another book from that author to read, and I'm really excited about it. Okay, my last book and my only 5-star read for this month was a nonfiction and a theology read. This is The Unquenchable Flame by Michael Reeves. I have never read anything from this author before, but he is a new fave author. His writing is fantastic. This book is essentially an extremely concise history of the Reformation, and if you had asked me before I read this if this book, which is super short, 191 pages of actual text and then some notes, I would have said that there's no way someone could explain the Reformation and all the major events and people in less than 200 pages, but Michael Reeves did it, and he did it in a great way. I actually learned so much from this book. I would say this is the best book on the Reformation I've ever read, and that's mostly because he doesn't dedicate the entire book to Martin Luther. If you read Reformation literature, so many people just talk about Martin Luther, which is fine. You know, he's great, and I respect everything he did for the Reformation, but there were definitely other people involved in the Reformation besides Martin Luther. And this book gives pretty much equal time to everyone, which I really liked. It also goes a bit further than most people do because, again, most people like to stop talking about the Reformation after Luther, but this one goes all the way up through Henry VIII and Mary Queen of Scots and all that. So even if you're not already well versed on the Reformation, I would recommend this. I think this is a great starting point, and this book actually mentions several other books that he's drawing from for info that I have put on my TBR because I want to dive into some of those subjects a bit more. And I've also put some Michael Reeves on my TBR as well because his writing style is so good. It's very clear, it's not clunky, and he's really funny actually. I did not expect to giggle and laugh a couple times while I was reading a book about the Reformation. But yeah, this definitely deserves 5 stars, and it was probably my favorite read of the month. My favorite fiction read was probably Dragonfruit, so interesting combination there. Okay, this video is almost an hour long, so I think I should wrap it up now. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about my reads from March, and I would love it if you commented below and told me your favorite book that you read in March. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!